Okay, everyone, welcome. I think we can get started then. My name is Ann Lang. I'm the Executive Director of PHAP, that's short for the International Association of Professionals in Humanitarian Assistance and Protection. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you and to be serving as host for today's webinar, The Critical Role of Ethics in Forced Migration Research, Refugee Participation, Do No Harm, and the IASFM Code of Ethics. It's organized by UNHCR, the International Association for the Study of Forced Migration, IASFM, the Global Academic Interdisciplinary Network, and PHAP. So welcome everyone. I know we have a lot of people joining from all over the world. It's great to see so much interest in this topic and very much looking forward to the discussion with our panelists and with all of you. Now, before we start the session, I'd like to just briefly explain a few technical aspects of the platform. First, if you encounter any technical problems with the platform, you can use one of our video or audio live streaming backup options. These use less bandwidth, so they can be convenient if you have a weaker internet connection. However, do note that they do not allow for the same level of interactivity. To connect to them, just follow the links that you see now on your screen. My colleague will also be sharing these links in the chat. And if you need those links again at any time during the session, please simply mention in the chat that you need the links to the backup live stream, and my colleague will be happy to share those for you again. I'm also pleased to announce that interpretation is available for today's event in Arabic, English, French, and Spanish. Please select your preferred language using the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. There are also English closed captions for increased accessibility. To enable them, click on the CC button and then choose Show Subtitle. If you have any problems with the captions in Zoom, or if you are following the live stream, you can also access the captions via your browser at the link at the bottom of the slide that you see now. My colleague will also be happy to post this in the chat. As always, your active participation in today's discussion is encouraged, and you can submit questions and comments throughout the event. In the Zoom platform, please use the chat or the Q&A button. And note that if you use the Q&A button, you do have the option to submit your question anonymously if you wish. If you're following the live stream or in the event app, type your question or comment in the session chat. Great. So with that, we'll turn to the substance of today's event. Research on forced migration provides critical input into the processes that help shape policy on displacement and humanitarian response. On that account, researchers should directly engage refugees, other forcibly displaced groups, and the communities that host them. The self-representation of refugees is a principle that has recently been reaffirmed through the discussions around the Global Compact on Refugees, as well as other processes. However, directly involving vulnerable populations in research comes with ethical considerations for researchers, as well as for practitioners working with forced migrant populations and the forced migrants themselves. These include unequal power relations, legal precariousness, extreme poverty, violence, the criminalization of migration, and politicized research contexts, among others. To help navigate these kinds of situations, the International Association for the Study of Forced Migration, IASFM, adopted a code of ethics in 2018, which provides a starting point for active, critical engagement with ethical issues in forced migration research. Today, we'll be discussing some of the particular ethical challenges faced in researching situations of forced migration, how these relate to the application in practice of the principle of do no harm, and the IASFM Code of Ethics. And to help us look at this issue from a few different angles, we're joined today by 5 speakers from both academia and humanitarian practice. So our speakers can feel free to turn on their videos now. So first, I'd like to give a warm welcome to Idil Atak, Associate Professor in the Department of Criminology at Ryerson University and also IASFM Secretary. Welcome, Idil. And Jeff Gilbert, Professor of International Human Rights and Humanitarian Law, the School of Law and Human Rights Center with the University of Essex, and Chair of the Global Academic Interdisciplinary Network of the Global Compact on Refugees. Great to have you with us, Jeff.
Hello. I hope it's going to be a great webinar.
As do I. Welcome. And Alfred Babo, Assistant Professor of Sociology and Anthropology at Fairfield University. Welcome, Alfred.
Hi, thank you. Hi, everyone.
Thanks for being here. And Roxandra Boujour, Camp Coordination and Camp Management Cluster Coordinator in Yemen. Great to have you with us, Roxandra.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Good to be here.
And last but certainly not least, Abulon Okello, master student in Dadaab with the Borderless Higher Education for Refugees, BEAR, organized by York University, but joining us today from the UNHCR office in Kakuma. Great to have you with us, Abulon. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here, and thank you, and hi, everyone.
Excellent, excellent. Welcome. So I'd like to first spend some time with all of you on the underlying question: why is it that research ethics are particularly important in the study of forced migration? So Jeff, I'll turn to you first as chair of the Global Academic Interdisciplinary Network of the Global Compact on Refugees, and of course with a long record of research related to forced migration. What are some of the potential issues and dilemmas that researchers are faced with? Over to you, Jeff.
Well, there are two things. First, the global north should not be looking on refugee research as a series of case studies rather than as a participatory exercise. The refugee voice is an equal one, not simply a source of data. Now, consent is essential in all research, but more so here, where the displaced populations are already in a situation of vulnerability. They don't need any further exploitation, particularly by researchers. And the refugee scholars in low and middle income countries need to be co-researchers, not simply a source of access. Joint authorship of outputs should be a given. Now, the second thing, very briefly, anonymization is not enough. Refugee status may be individual, even where there is prima facie status, but persecution is usually targeting groups. Talking about locations of particular groups of refugees lets their persecutors know where humanitarian actors are operating, and that can even be the case with satellite imagery. So ideas that you would ordinarily sort of just dismiss when doing research in the global north on, let's say, incorporeal hereditaments in English land law, for instance. There may be someone out there. There are so many other questions that you need to think about relating to humanitarian practice. Researchers in this field need to always think about not just do no harm, but the humanitarian principles that all humanitarian actors use: humanity, impartiality, independence.
Thank you so much for that, Jeff. And we'll be coming back to you again shortly. But now I would like to turn to Idil. You've been on the IASFM Executive Committee in different roles since 2016, and in the discussions and conferences of the association, has the need for strengthening research ethics been apparent? Over to you, Idil.
Sure, and hi everyone. So, as some of you may know, the International Association for the Study of Forced Migration, IASFM, is an independent community of scholars, practitioners, and policymakers, and we are international in scope and membership. Our membership work and interact with people in different regions of the world where forced migration is a pressing issue. Forced migration is also an important research and policy area. And despite that, until very recently, there were no specific ethical guidelines for research with displaced people. So to answer your question, yes, the need to fill this gap has been part of the conversations within the IASFM, and the need was expressed by our membership to come up with a practical set of guidelines that can be utilized in multidisciplinary and cross-sectoral ways by our membership. And there was also acknowledgement that these guidelines would in turn promote a better understanding of forced migration, and importantly, a better understanding of displaced persons' special needs and vulnerability. Thus, there was an understanding that the guidelines would be instrumental in improving policies and practices affecting people in situations of forced migration.
Great, thanks very much, Idil. Some important points there that we'll be picking up on in a few minutes. Now, Abulon, turning to you as a master's student about to start your thesis research, we will discuss with you a bit later about the research ethics dilemmas in your studies, but I'd like to ask you first, as a refugee yourself living in the Dadaab refugee camp, how does the need for research ethics as described by Jeff and by Idil, how does it resonate with you? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think what the Idil and Geoff raised was very important concern. And because right now, ethics are the great, if you wanted to conduct research within the refugee camp, the first things that a researcher should consider to act on it is to follow the guideline of the codes of ethics, so that the refugee at least can have earned some respect. So one of the issues is that currently there are a lot of issues in the camp where it has to be governed through the code of ethics. And then the other things also, refugee camps are actually becoming an interesting place where researchers are becoming open and wanted to do much research within the refugee camps for them to share or find out new ideas within the refugee camp. So that being said, since refugees are people from war-zone countries, and there are a lot of vulnerability in the camp, so the only things that a refugee can be protected from is that code of ethics that the organization had come up with. So I am fully in agreement with the implementation of the code of ethics, which is actually is a little bit lacking within the refugee camps from the researchers. So and also as a refugee myself and my colleague, we have to be part of the research, whatever research that's going to take place with the refugee camp. The refugee scholars have to be part of it for them to have that some part of involvement. So which means generally what Idil and Jeff said are actually true concern with the refugee.
Okay, thanks a lot, Abulon. Now, Alfred, turning to you, in your work as a researcher, have you observed this to be a problem actually in practice? Have you seen researchers making questionable ethical choices in how they design and carry out their research? You have the floor, Alfred.
Okay, thank you for the question. I will just maybe talk about just two aspects of the problem that I have observed. One is usually in practice, sometimes a researcher might overlook overlook the emotional distress of the subject of the participant in the research, especially because basically they tend to consider the refugees as subjects or again participants or to the research in the research. So the focus is more on how to collect the data for the research or the researcher professional goal. So that's one of the problems. The second problem that I have observed during many conferences I have attended is sometimes you attend a panel which is discussing refugee issue in this panel, and you can't see any refugee on the table. You can see a refugee as a presenter or refugee as a co-presenter of the paper that is submitted or discussed. So this is part of what I think is kind of missing, and which is still kind of taking the refugees as just a source of data. And we can go further to see that, of course, it's not very common to see the researcher co-authoring to be co-author with one refugee of a paper which is published or which is presented. So these are these 2 points that I wanted to raise. Thank you.
Very important points. Thank you, Alfred. So we see this issue of joint authorship coming up more than once, and hopefully we'll be able to come back to that as well. Now, Bruxandra, we'll be talking more later about how these questions relate to the work of humanitarian practitioners, but I did want to ask you now at the outset, when looking at the need for ethical guidance, as a humanitarian practitioner working in camp management, do you also see a comparable need for ethical guidance in the areas mentioned by the other speakers? How does this relate to ethics in camp management and the principle of do no harm? Over to you, Roxandra.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. I definitely would agree with the statement that there is a dire need to adhere by very, very practical and very well formulated ethical guidance when interacting with refugees, especially with regards to research, and especially when this is done by external people to the population of concern. So from the perspective of a camp manager, but also from the perspective of UNHCR as an agency, given our role with regards to international protection in situations of displacement, absolutely we would encourage such a practice to be, again, as much practical as possible, given the fact that the people that we are conversing with may have gone through different types of trauma. They may have a very sensitive status. Indeed, here there are issues of do no harm and also data protection as mentioned. But again, I would like to re-emphasize and stress the earlier point that our colleague Jeff made with regards to taking a bit of a step back from the way that we're seeing the problem really, and understanding that refugees and the displaced are people which shouldn't be necessarily regarded as a research subject. So I think that is the core of what we need to be mindful of when looking at such guidelines. And of course, again, in situations like the ones that we're discussing here, of people being in a situation of active displacement. Again, we can't stress enough the fact that care needs to be the first thing that we have in mind prior to engaging in any kind of research modalities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roxandra. Now, we've received several questions regarding what specifically drove the development of the IASFM Code of Ethics. For example, we have Ayman in Egypt writing, why a new code of ethics? Why don't we follow the many codes of ethics that are already available in social science? So on this question from Ayman, I'd like to turn to you, Idil. You were previously the president of the Canadian Association for Refugee and Forced Migration Studies, and you were involved in drafting that association's ethical guidelines, which also, of course, helped inform the development of the IASFM Code of Ethics. What was it that you found missing in existing codes of research ethics that needed to be directly addressed? Over to you, Idil.
Sure, and thanks a lot, Ayman, for this question. First of all, there are places in the world with no formal research ethics boards, or places where ethics approval is not required for conducting primary research. So in such cases, the IASFM Code of Ethics definitely fills an important gap. Secondly, existing codes of ethics do not necessarily acknowledge or take into consideration particular ethical challenges raised by research with people in situations of forced migration. And in the introductory remarks, it's been mentioned, these challenges are multiple. Some of them are related to forced migrants' precarious legal status in the host country, their social or economic condition, their extreme dependence on governments for survival, for funds, for example, dependence on service providers for services. So this creates a huge power imbalance between the researcher and research participant. And in this context, take, for example, genuine, voluntary, informed consent that can become extremely challenging to obtain. And this is something that the Code of Ethics of the IASFM reminds us and offers some guidelines. The criminalization of forced migration is another worrying global trend that existing codes of ethics largely ignore. Think of the closure of potentially incriminating information, whereby research might put at risk the safety and the security of participants. Another example is online methods for data collection, which may be subject to interception. So when we consider the compounding effects of all these factors, one can clearly see why the general ethical principles are insufficient and they needed to be complemented.
Okay, thank you. And staying with you, Idil, you mentioned briefly at the beginning about the development of the Code of Ethics, but I wonder if you could elaborate a bit more. What did the development process look like, and if you could highlight some of the main principles that the association decided to focus on in the final version? Back to you.
Yes, so guidelines have been the result of a collaborative effort and an inclusive process. That said, I'd like to pay tribute to the work and leadership of Dr. Christina Clark-Kazak, who is currently president of IASFM. She took the lead and prepared the draft guidelines. Then a widespread consultation with stakeholders was initiated. The consultation was aimed to understand the needs of displaced people, first of all, but also of governmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, and researchers. Workshops were organized in Canada and at IASFM conferences to reach a range of stakeholders. And the aim was also to build consensus. This process led, first of all, to the adoption of a Canadian-specific guidelines by 3 leading organizations in Canada. And building on these Canadian guidelines, the IASFM then developed a broader code. which was adopted by membership 2 years ago. So the process involved an incremental but collaborative and inclusive approach. And there are several key principles to answer the second part of your question. And these principles are highlighted in the Code of Ethics, and these are autonomy, partnership, diversity, equity, competence. The Code of Ethics is special because it embeds each of these key principles within the general ethical rules of voluntary informed consent, confidentiality, privacy, do no harm principle. Briefly, just to give an example, competence requires the use of methodological approaches that are adopted to cultural context, for example, and to specific challenges of forced migration that I previously mentioned.
Great, thank you very much. So now I'd like to move on to pick up. We've had some questions coming in, for example, from Lucy in Switzerland, asking about how the code is being implemented in practice. So I'd like on that to turn to Jeff. To ask, how would you see guidance like the IASFM Code of Ethics being used in practice by researchers, especially as we discussed in preparation for today's event, that researchers are already using different codes and ethical guidance and are required to do so. So how do you see the Code of Ethics from IASFM complementing that or not? Over to you, Jeff.
Okay, so where there are existing ethical codes at universities, that's what the researcher is going to be focusing on first and foremost, because ensuring your employer is happy is basically what all people do. And university academics are no different. That said, most of those codes of ethics are about doing any research on anything. And what is clear to those of us who have been working in this field for, in my case, decades, I'm really grateful that I've had the experience, thanks to UNHCR, of actually working with displaced persons on the ground in various countries, face to face. This is obviously before COVID-19 came along. And that teaches you so much about respect, about ensuring consent, about that consent being informed consent, and about participation. And I think what the IASFM guidance gives us is a way of understanding our own university's requirements in a way that will be specific to those wanting to carry out this sort of research, whether it will be in person, whether it will be by questionnaire, whether it'll be on a Zoom link like this. Hopefully that will come to an end sometime soon, who knows? But it's this level of engagement that people who are starting in this field don't quite understand until you've been there, until you're actually talking to someone who has had to flee for a variety of reasons, that you learn to show respect, to show that you want to ensure their participation in this research. And that means, if you can, acknowledging them by name, not just I interviewed a refugee, okay? But obviously you have to protect identity on occasions. But equally, bringing their ideas into your analysis and acknowledging that you have developed your analysis, having spoken with the variety of people you meet. So in other words, all research develops as you go along. Accept that you're going to develop it in the light of the people you speak to who are displaced persons. I'll leave it at that. Come back if you want any more.
Sorry, just a little blip there. Jeff, we have a question that's just come in, and it picks up really, really nicely on your remarks there. So I'd like to pose it now back to you. This is a question from Faten, who is wondering. So Fatin writes, is there a gap in academia in this regard? Are researchers working on refugee issues not being formed or properly trained or prepared for the challenges that they may face in fieldworks? Are researchers, in your view, actually being properly trained on the ethical considerations at this time, or is that a gap that needs itself to be filled? Back to you, Jeff.
Well, I think there must be a gap, otherwise we would not have needed this code of ethics to be spelt out quite so fully and clearly. So yes, we have to accept, and I would accept that there's a lack of expertise in some circumstances, even for me, and I've been working with UNHCR now for over 25 years. Okay, so you always need to learn. There is a gap. Some of the things are also ideas that would not have been sort of at the forefront back in the 1990s. The code of ethics that we apply is new because it develops all the time. So I think, yes, there is a gap. One of the things that which really sort of took off at the beginning of this millennium was making certain that do no harm, okay? And do no harm included not re-traumatizing the people you were talking to. Learning how to do that is so difficult. I'm a lawyer. I don't have all the expertise for asking the questions in the right way. I talk to people in UNHCR to learn how to do this. There's now a range of training programs available on how to conduct ethical research. Yes, before you start engaging, read up, talk to the relevant actors, and when you go and meet with refugees, there will be people from UNHCR or some of the partner organizations there. Ask them before you even start asking your questions, what are the appropriate attitudes that you should always adopt in these circumstances? It's a learning process for all of us all the time.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Jeff. Idil, turning back to you, the IASFM Code of Ethics is a relatively new document. It was just adopted at the end of 2018. What kind of interest have you seen in it so far? It sounds like it is really filling a need. Have you seen it already start to be used in practice? Over to you, Idil.
Well, there has been a lot of interest in the Code of Ethics. For instance, Christina Clark-Kazak has been instrumental in drafting and dissemination of the ethics. Code of Ethics was invited to give keynotes in Germany, in Finland, and Canada on the Code of Ethics. So it has also been cited in academic and government work. I am myself conducting fieldwork in Canada with vulnerable migrants, including undocumented migrants, and I systematically refer and take inspiration from the Code of Ethics. It's been useful also, as I said, where there are no formal research ethics boards and where ethics approval is not required for primary research. That said, I think our work is not done yet. We need to continue our efforts of outreach and dissemination, for instance, in other languages. And events like this one are extremely helpful.
Great, thank you. We have a question coming in, Idil. I'd like to pose it to you if you don't mind. This is a question from Valeria. And Valeria writes, how does the Code of Ethics address the issue of overassessment of burdening communities and the purpose of the research? Valeria is currently working in Lebanon, and she finds that overassessment is a big problem that affected communities often refer to as a burden and as a source of added stress and added frustration. In situations where there are a multitude of actors collecting data, what would be a question that you would ask yourself before going going ahead with the research or assessment, how much do you consider the need for returning to the affected community, and how would you measure it, particularly for research that's not necessarily linked to a change in assistance or living conditions of the affected people? Over to you, Idil.
Yes, thank you for this question. One of the key principles in the IASFM Code of Ethics is partnership. So one way of dealing with these over-soliciting communities and participants would be to consider collaborative research. This would also minimize the risk of asking traumatizing questions over and over again, and the risk of re-traumatizing displaced people. I would refer to this partnership principle, there are many other ways of promoting partnership, for example, including relevant partners throughout the research process. For instance, in research design and data analysis, to make sure that the research process is inclusive and reflect the concerns, as well as questions of the displaced people. Budgeting funding for all partners, including displaced people, are part also of the partnership.
Great, thank you. I'm just scanning through. We have so many questions coming in specifically about the Code of Ethics. I think perhaps I'll move on for now, and then I'll be coming back to you, Idil, for a couple of additional questions on this. But for now, turning to Alfred, in your work, I know that you've come across issues with how research ethics are followed. What practical benefits do you think the IASFM Code of Ethics can bring? What would you highlight in that regard? Over to you, Alfred.
Thank you. I think one important point, which is a great progress, is the principle of competence. I think that's really a good point for researchers and also for the community of refugees, especially when the principle reads that we will ensure adequate training for all involved in research projects. So that means, I guess, with a good training of those who are involved in the work, is the best way probably to even start with the principle of do no harm. That's probably the best way to limit, to mitigate any possibility of hurting people that we want to work with. So this principle, I think, is really beneficial in terms of moving forward for this work. I will say that in our group of reflection that I will probably have the chance to talk about later, we think that even for this principle of competence, we can even go further and recognize, the competencies and the skills, the expertise of refugees themselves on the field. So there we might have, some people who are already well trained in different fields and who were already experts in different fields in their country before they ended up in a camp. So knowing that we have some resources within the community of refugees could be a very good way to acknowledge their competencies and work with them. So that would be the best. Another principle, which is for me something that will bring more practical benefits, is the principle of equity. So that is another point which is important in terms of acknowledging or mitigating the power relation, which is, of course, kind of natural in this relationship between the researcher and the refugees. So being aware of this kind of relationship is something that can help both the researcher, so he can build a more equal relationship with the community and with the refugees. That's, I guess, for me and for our group of reflection is something which is very important at that point, that we can put kind of equality between us and the researcher, and that is also a good way to push further the principle of partnership that maybe we can develop later.
Great, thank you. Staying with you, Alfred, we have a question from Yolanda that I would like to pose to you. So picking up on your points regarding principle of do no harm, Yolanda's wondering, should things go actually a step further? So Yolanda writes, I am a first-year master's student and starting to think about my dissertation. We often speak about do no harm, but what are your thoughts on those who say that we should move beyond that and recognize that researchers have an obligation to design research projects that actually bring about reciprocal benefits for refugee participants? What is your reaction to that, Alfred?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess one probably do no harm is kind of across many disciplines. I'm an anthropologist, and that's also part of the AAA, the American Anthropological Association ethical codes. So that's something I teach to my students. So it's kind of across the disciplines, and it seems to be, of course, one of the major ethical principle. We are not doing research to harm people, but at the same time, the question is how what we're doing is beneficial for both, and that should be the concern of the researcher. And when we are looking at this kind of research and having this principle in mind, I think it should be all the way from the beginning to the end of the process. And there is no one point, one step where the do no harm will stop, because it's not do no harm during the research on the field or on the ground in the camp or in wherever you meet the refugees. But even do no harm is also when you're treating your data, when you are drafting your article or drafting your book. So I think it's still a very powerful principle, and the best way probably to put it into to work on it and to have it every time in mind is to continuously have the refugees involved in what we're doing. So of course, if the researchers tend to forget these aspects, the refugee will be there to remind them that this is not what we want to be published, for example, about us, and we didn't give you this information to be published, for example, even if it was okay to talk about that during the conversation, during the interview, but we don't want that maybe in your final paper, something like that, or we don't want to present it at a conference. So I guess that's the way I see how we should be implemented and applying the do no harm principle.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alfred. Now, turning to Abelone, you've just submitted your thesis research proposal. How have you addressed the question of research ethics, and did you refer to the IASFM Code of Ethics? Over to you, Abelone.
Great. Thank you so much for that question. And actually, my research was surrounding the implication of repatriation and relocation of individual and family in the Dadaab refugee camp. That was the title of my research. And actually, the first thing I did was to read the York University Senate Policy for Research Involving Human Participants and IASFM Code of Ethics. Then after reading those important information regarding research, I feel the human participation review forms where the York Research Ethics Board went through it several times, and then lastly I got approved. So that was the step that I took. Though I'm refugees living in the Dadaab camp, there is great need for me myself to actually follow the strict rules of code of ethics because that one will help them to build much trust on me. Then the practical part, the hardest part was not feeling or having the code of ethics. The hardest part was the practical part of putting those ethics on practice. That was the hardest part for me because one of the things that I came to see when I was within the refugee camp, there is that broken up trust between the researching body and then the refugee themselves, because several times many people had come to either Dadaab or Kakuma or refugee camps to do research, but after the research they won't get any feedbacks, or there's nothing like they've gotten. There isn't any change that they were contributed to that part of research that was done. So if I can remember very well, there are the people, the participants that I chosen for my interview, because one of the methods that I chosen for my research was conducting an interview. So the first two people refused first. They refused to participate. They refused to turn up to answer my questions. But now, after like talking to them for several times, giving them time to read the consent form, because I had to prepare, I had the consent form where I mentioned everything, where I suppose like the part of confidentiality, where whatever information they give me has to be very kept away from other body to know them. So when I asked them why don't you participate on the research, they told me that I've been part of the research several times, but there wasn't change so far. And then one of the participants told me that several times the research that is being done it doesn't reflect the issues that is happening within the refugee camp. Most of them are issues that concerning other things. But now what I did was, again, after now they accept to turn to answer my questions, the research questions. The first thing I did was I translate the consent form into two major languages, because the refugees have stayed in the camp for a long time. Giving them something in English would actually make them very difficult. They cannot read. They can read, but getting them critical understanding of what you present to them will be a little bit very hard. So what I did, I translate my consent form into two major languages, that become the Somalis and the Gambian language. Then now I hand over for them. They went through it. They read, they understand. Then after that, they gave me time and they accept to be part of the interview. So what actually I have, another thing that I also come to know during my research, they don't tend to trust me. They also took me as part of researcher, because the same thing I'm doing has been done and there wasn't any feedback. And then I had to explain to them that I will always be with you, and then share my final outcome of this research with you. And then that is now where they start to build the confidences with me. Then now, after building that confidences, is now where they give their time. That's one of the things. But in generally, among the principles of the Code of Ethics, one of the principles that I came to know, and also the refugees themselves came to understand, is the part of confidentiality. They are not very sure. Like, they don't have that belief that the information they give out will be kept secret, because most of them are people from home, most of them are politicians, most of them are now living in the refugee camps, doing other businesses, and most of them also fear the host government, thinking that maybe in case I give out information contrary to what the government is there, maybe I may be denied with something else, or with the information, or with the benefits of being as refugees. So there are those things within the refugee camps, and there are also those part of things that I also share with the refugees. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Abulon. I have a question here from Miuri that is picking up on some of your remarks there, particularly around ensuring that the results of research are reaching the refugees as well. So I'll just read Miuri's question. I'd like to ask you, Abulon, for your reactions, and then I'll turn to Alfred as well to see if you have anything to add. So Miuri writes as follows. Involvement of those impacted by forced migration at each stage, developing research questions, design, methods, etc., is good practice, but I wonder about the results of the research. How can we ensure that the results are disseminated to participants of the study and those that would potentially be impacted by its recommendations? Now, Abulon, you spoke a bit about what you have personally done and how you've built confidence. I wonder if you have any further reflections on that, or perhaps, advice that you could share with others. Over to you, Abulon.
Yeah, thank you. The ways of actually reaching or disseminating information in regards to the research, for instance, okay, for me myself, I am close to the people whom I interview them, those who participate into my interview. Then the last part of the feedback, or the last, I can share with them because they are near to me. But now maybe for people outside Dadaab, maybe, if you are outside Dadaab, you cannot come direct to the refugee population. That can be seen different thing. But there are ways that outside the people outside Dadaab can come through to the refugees. For instance, there is that UNHCR. So if you did your interview in the first place, or if you come to UNHCR in the first place, I think in the second time again you can come to UNHCR and share your the research feedbacks with UNHCR, and the UNHCR can be able to call the people whom you interview them, or in that sort. And also there is part that government sector called RAS. It is also possible for the researcher to pass the feedbacks through that through that body, and then it will reach to the beneficiary or to the refugee themselves. So there is where now the refugee will earn the trust of the scholars or the researchers. So once there's that part of sharing the feedbacks with them, I think they will be open and open the door, and also have more welcoming of scholars to do the research within the refugee camps. So that, I think, to my understand, that would be the way for the researchers to send the feedbacks to the refugees.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Abulon. And Alfred, I wonder if you have any thoughts on that question as well.
Of course. That's a great point that Abulon made about how the results of a research made together with the refugees not at that time considered only as participants, but really people who are part of the whole process, starting from the inception of the research project itself, drafting and reflecting on the research questions, and doing even the fieldwork together until the results. So basically, there will be kind of responsible for the research that, the outcome of the research that they were part of, as I said from the beginning. And as I was saying earlier, when we reach out the point of presenting the results to a conference or to an audience, another thing which is very important is, as we were saying in Share the Platform, is that is where we will ask, for example, the refugee or those who participated in this research to be in the front and to be those who will be even presenting these results. So at that time, and doing that way, I guess, it's probably the best way for the community to, to be really engaged with the result that they were part of from the beginning. That's as I said, and being the person who will be presenting them, who will be writing about them, will be the co-author of this this kind of research. And I guess that's the best way for the community to be responsible of the result and to accept them.
Great, thank you so much. We have so many questions coming in. I'm going to indulge in just a couple more before we move to the next portion of our discussion. For this one, I'd like to turn to Idil. We have a question from Joshua who writes, how do we ensure that the Code of Ethics will be complied with by a wide range of researchers on forced migration? How do we even ensure that researchers are aware of the existence of the code in the first place? This, I know, is a gap, having worked firsthand with refugees and seen such researchers on the ground who have no idea about this Code of Ethics. Over to you, Idil.
Oh, thank you for this question. It's a great question. I think the IASFM can use its membership to disseminate further the Code of Ethics and in several languages. So we would like to see very much this Code of Ethics translated in several languages. This would be a first constructive step. And then our membership, we can also use our conferences. Our next conference will be organized in Ghana, virtually, unfortunately, but these form a good platform to raise awareness and to engage our membership to be more aware of the Code of Ethics and to be ready to disseminate them in different contexts, different countries. In Canada, we organize workshops regularly on codes of ethics and research ethics to raise awareness and to encourage researchers and different stakeholders, including policymakers, practitioners, and people who are refugees and migrants, to get to know, to get to be familiarized with these principles, the key principles embedded in the Code of Ethics. I think these are good steps, and the work is ongoing. And I would be happy to see any comments and suggestions that you have.
Okay, thank you very much, Idil. And very helpful response, I think, to that question. Now to Jeff, we have had a few questions coming in asking you specifically for some more practical input on how to prepare researchers. Several people have written. I'll just read this one example. The question from Marcelino, who writes. In a practical way, beyond studying the Code of Ethics, how would you prepare a group of students that have never been to a refugee camp who are going for research? For example, a team of one master's student and one PhD researcher going to a Congolese camp in Uganda to do a research on the impact of SGBV as the cause of displacement. Is there a specific training course that you would send them for, specific reading material? Would you have them do mock interviews? What do you think?
I think my starting point would be to ask, why am I sending a master's or a PhD student to a camp in the DRC? Okay. And that'd be it doesn't strike me as something that I would even think of doing as a starting point. You might ask students to engage with dealing with the material that's collected, but if I were wanting to engage with displaced persons in the DRC, the first people I would reach out to are other academics in the DRC with whom I've worked in the past, ask them how they would make contact, work with the UNHCR people I know in the DRC, so that I'm actually making certain that we're not going to be sending in people who are absolutely new to refugee situations to ask questions of persons who are forcibly displaced. That's not the start. That's never a starting point. Before anybody engages in that research, they've done other research in the field. Later, they can go and meet with refugees, ask them directly face to face. I'd done an awful lot of research in the field with UNHCR, whereas working with lawyers, working with other UNHCR staff, learning from them before I even thought myself competent to speak to forcibly displaced persons. I think that one of the problems with the current pandemic is that Zoom has made it so possible now to actually meet with people anywhere in the world at any time. And I do think, therefore, that even Zoom access needs to be properly regulated. You need proper training. I would definitely, if one of my own students, PhD students, wanted to meet with persons of concern, I would make certain that I had done mock interviews with them, that I had ensured that they had engaged in training that prevented them from re-traumatizing, that they were also aware of vicarious trauma, because one of the problems that anybody working in this field will know about is that talking at length or even just once to persons who've been forcibly displaced will affect you. And if it doesn't affect you, you aren't properly empathizing and engaging and doing a research at the appropriate level. You are actually then treating them really as just a case study. If you're properly engaging, it will affect you. So you need to be prepared yourself for dealing with this sort of material. But my starting point would be never a master's student, never a PhD student who had never been in a displacement situation going to that and talking to refugees as a starting point. That would never happen. Well, it should never happen, okay, personally.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeff. Now, we do have more questions. I expect we'll be able to come back to them, but I'd like to move to the next section because we have been focusing quite a bit now on the role of academics, but would like to turn next to how this discussion on research ethics also applies to humanitarian practitioners. First, I would like to ask about the role of humanitarian actors as explicitly referred to in this code of ethics. So turning to you, Roxandra, as a camp coordination and camp management cluster coordinator, you are acting in a role that is sometimes referred to as a quote, gatekeeper role in the IASFM Code of Ethics, acting as an interface or facilitator when researchers are trying to gain access to displaced populations. Is this how you see your role when interacting with researchers? I wonder if you could speak a bit to that. Over to you, Roxandra.
Thank you. Yes, I would like first maybe to discuss a little bit the terminology used here with regards to the term specifically gatekeeper. I think here we're just for the sake of clarity, I think we're here referring to our role as humanitarian workers and our role with relation to interfacing on a daily basis with refugees and those displaced widely, as facilitators. Gatekeepers may provoke different reactions and may potentially have also a negative connotation. We're not in any way maintaining any type of gating with regards to refugees or otherwise people displaced, but we do have a responsibility as camp managers, but also as UNHCR towards the condition of people, towards the welfare of this population group, if you'd like. So in that sense, in terms of facilitation, in terms of granting potentially a better access to those requiring research to be done in refugee camps or refugee settings, then yes, I would say that the UN in general and UNHCR specifically in regards to refugee context is very well placed to create that bridge. And with relation to ethics, again, mentioning our role with regards to protecting such population groups, we would of course look at the details of the research purpose, look at the methods used, look at the appropriateness of the language, look at ensuring that the people carrying out this type of research not only have access to the population, but that they are very well equipped to deal with situations which they may not be familiar with. Not, again, as said, not just to ensure that our population of concern is unaffected, but also the other way around as well. So, as mentioned before, indeed, there are these are very, very sensitive situations, and do no harm is one of the aspects that we would look at facilitating, but not just that. Again, I would like to stress the importance of data protection, as was mentioned earlier as well, and considerations which go also a bit beyond ethics that ensure the well-being of such population to be surveyed. And again, I would like to just encourage everyone to look at people as people to begin with, and from the get-go not have a mindset of engaging with them as a topic of discussion, or exactly as a body to be studied. I think if that is at the core of any engagement, again, stressing the sensitivities that need to be minded for, I think that would be the best starting point. And again, just to reiterate and respond to your question, we do gladly provide this support to those that require it in terms of facilitating access to the population of our concern in humanitarian settings.
Thank you very much. I wonder, Roxandra, so as a humanitarian practitioner, do you have any examples that you can share with us of how this has played out in practice with researchers asking for assistance with access to displaced populations?
Yes, of course. I myself also come from a research background and have studied peace and conflict research at Uppsala University. And funny enough, in my time in Iraq a few years ago, in this same function with UNHCR, I had colleagues from Uppsala University intending to run a study on the population that had fled Mosul in Iraq. Now, I'm not very sure how familiar everyone is with this context, but the reason for fleeing such an area in Iraq was and remains quite sensitive, given the terrorist group that occupied the area. So the research topic was very much focused on this, and specifically how people can reintegrate in a different location, having been previously in such an area with such sensitivities. So clearly, while of course the research on this is very good to have, and it lacks greatly. And so, while realizing that the topic to be surveyed is extremely important, of course we have a responsibility to ensure that the population that is being looked at and the topic that is meant to be found out more about, that the people are, of course, well prepared as well. So yes, and clearly there are many other examples of such research, possibly also in less sensitive circumstances. But yes, again, just to re-emphasize the main idea in such a situation, in such an example, is indeed, from our perspective, again, from having an interaction with the population on a day-to-day basis, is indeed to ensure that all of the aspects of the research are looked at from an international protection perspective. So again, what we would do is support as much as possible such research, but again, we would go through every detail with those involved to ensure that all of the aspects, again, I can stress enough, the methodology is very important. And we would indeed provide technical support, additional training, and any kind of related facilitation. Again, there were quite a few aspects asked previously with regards to how do you prepare, what are the trainings, and so on. And again, I think it's very important to ensure that the conversations take place previously with people that are exposed to this context, or the context that is to be researched, people specifically that work with the population that is of concern to the research, but also asking consistently for technical support, because when looking at doing the research, we may have our own lens and our own purposes, which may be limited to, again, the research topic and the results that need to be obtained. However, due to the sensitivities of displacement, there are many other technical aspects which need to be considered, with which UNHCR can support with. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We have another question, if I can find it, from Sarah that I wanted to pose to you. Let me see. Yes, here it is. So, Ruxandra, this question from Sarah is as follows. How do we manage the balance between protection, on the one hand, versus ensuring inclusion of refugees in dissemination platforms, which may undermine their safety and security? I know this is a concern that many have, and I think you're probably the best place to answer. Over to you, Ruxandra.
Thank you. Yes, that's a very good question. I must say, quite a tricky one that we ourselves also face. I would say, first of all, there needs to be a clear understanding from the beginning of the purpose of the research. And when I mean there needs to be a clear understanding, I mean the people of concern, the people that are involved and studied, do require to understand, not just to be told, but to understand what exactly is the purpose of the research, what data will be shared with whom and how. And of course, as it was mentioned previously, they would need to see and again understand their output. So while I think involving them in the exposing them to the disseminated output is important, I would take a little bit of a step back and ensure that the people that we're trying to involve in this way have had the opportunity to be very well presented with what exactly are the steps and the intentions behind this. So again, it's not just a matter of participation, it's a matter of having the people again be very well exposed to all of the elements of the study, and again with all of the elements that the research is aiming at, even prior to any kind of publication.
Great. Thanks so much. Now, staying with you, Ruxandra, because I want to move on to a related area here. So although the IASFM Code of Ethics is written with academics as its primary audience, it is the case that many of the same principles apply to related research work in humanitarian action. We have a question, for example, coming in from Seni in Burkina Faso, who asks, as a monitoring and evaluation assistant, what do I need to do to respect ethics in research on forced migration? So stepping away from academic research and looking at monitoring and evaluation in the context of humanitarian work. How do you find, Ruxandra, that research ethics, as discussed, can also be applied to these related areas of humanitarian practice, for example, needs assessment and M&E? Over to you.
Thank you for that. I believe truly that the Code of Ethics that we've been discussing so far is indeed a basis or can be regarded as a basis in humanitarian action as well. Here specifically, we're referring to the needs assessment, the monitoring and the evaluation of humanitarian programs. So that would be an additional data compilation that the humanitarian organizations or the UN does on their own programming, or for as third-party implementation as well. So from that sense, I would, to be frank, I would expect that any humanitarian would apply protection principles. Now, I think there is a very close link between protection principles, especially in refugee settings, and the Code of Ethics. There's quite a lot of similarity. What we would have additional are technical embedded aspects to be considered. We were talking previously about GBV. Now, from a humanitarian perspective, there is an endless array of documentation and guidance that has been produced throughout the years with regards to that specific aspect. Similar to other sensitive issues, such as discussing with children, such as discussing with women in different contexts, and so on. And so with respect to monitoring and evaluation specifically, I would hope that first of all, it would be very interesting actually to look at the code of ethics as a starting point, and then again, I would hope that a humanitarian worker would have additional training and knowledge of the technical humanitarian considerations, specifically with regards to protection aspects.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much for that, Ruxandra. See, we have limited time remaining, but I would like to get into focus here on the principle of partnership. We've received a lot of questions that are relating to this overall issue that within the IASFM Code of Ethics is labeled as the principle of partnership. For example, from Bruno in the Netherlands, we have the question, how do you make academic research worth your refugee interlocutors or respondents' time? And there are others who have asked similar questions. Also a question from Alwell in Nigeria, who asks, how can we make forced migration research more participatory and inclusive of the respondents? So this is a theme that all of you have discussed, but I'd like to turn now once more specifically to Alfred. Alfred, you've been involved in a new initiative called Share the Platform, which focuses in particular on questions related to the principle of partnership in the IASFM Code of Ethics. What is it that you're trying to achieve with this initiative? Over to you.
Thank you. I have been involved in a great initiative called Share the Platform, which is an initiative led by people of different background, and we thought that we can put together our diversity, it could be ethnic diversity, and try to break a little bit this idea of Westerner saving non-Westerners in terms of Western countries helping refugees from different parts of the world. And we have also in our group people who are who don't have refugee background and people who have refugee background, and we have practitioners and academics. So we have this kind of diversity that we put in together, and we thought that the main point that we want to make and to promote here is how do we share really what we're doing, whether as a practitioner or researcher, how do we really give the space and the place that they both deserve on the podium, on the research or the work that we're doing as agency or as researchers. So as I said previously, working together and not includes, or we're not looking at the participation of refugees as like the participatory approach where we build everything, okay, and then we asking the refugees to be participant in the research or in the work or the action that we want to take. We really believe that we can start by acknowledging, by recognizing that refugees have expertise, as I said, they have competencies, they have skills that we can be really surprised to see that if we give them the space, they might, they can take over what we think that they could not do, because we tend to take them as vulnerable people, and they don't have agency to do something. So our point, actually, they share the platform, is that if we acknowledge what they're capable of doing, and if we give them the space and we work with them together, then we could be surprised of what they can accomplish. So it's really aligned with the principle of partnership in for the IASFM ethic principle of partnership, because as I said, that's exactly what we think that is really important for us, not to talk or to speak on behalf of the refugees, not to act on behalf of them, but to be able to give them, this space and to work with them. And sometimes people, one thing we're experiencing, and I would say in the group, I'm kind of one of the perfect example because, of course, myself being someone of a refugee background and at the same time researcher, I have been invited by a big organization of School at, probably people know School at Risk, and I was invited to join the boards of this organization. So it's not to invite or to involve refugees in the process or in how to the implementation of the things, but we want also the refugees to be involved in the body of the decision-making bodies, the boards, the committees, where people take the decisions, where people reflect on what should we do for refugees, what should we do for them. We want them to be part of those boards and those instances where they can be part of the decision made for them. So that is how we see the partnership in our initiative, which is share the platform with the refugees. We really want to share the everything we're doing with the refugees. That's what we're doing.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alfred, for sharing that with us. Very interesting. And I can see in the chat that we have a number of people who are eager to follow up on that and to learn more. So we are coming, sadly, to the end of our time. We do have many questions that we weren't able to address live here. I hope that we'll find some way together with our panelists to perhaps pick some of those up even after the event. As part of the follow-up, it would be great to keep the discussion going, perhaps in the PHAP online discussion boards or in other fora. But at this time, I'd like to go around our virtual room and ask each of our panelists to share any closing thoughts you'd like to leave with us. I know that you've probably been following the chat as well, trying to keep up, as have I. So any last points that you'd like to bring, reactions to your panelists or to the chat, please, this is the moment. So we'll go first to Idil, then to Jeff, Alfred, Roxandra, and Abulon. So Idil, you have the floor.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for organizing, and also all the participants and the audience for organizing this event on behalf of the executive committee of the IASFM. I'm really grateful. So I just would like to highlight again the importance of the guiding principles involved in the IASFM Code of Conduct. And these are equity, right to self-determination, competence, partnership. And I would like to finish with that. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Idil, over to you, Jeff.
As Idil said, thank you so much for organising this, and thank you to all the participants and panelists and my fellow panelists for making this a really interesting discussion. As chair of the Global Academic Interdisciplinary Network, I want to say that we need more collaboration across the world in terms of research projects. And one of the problems that would be addressed by that is the one of involving refugees and other persons of concern to UNHCR in the planning of research proposals, because it's next to impossible to get the ethical clearance to involve in the planning until you've got the project already designed. So greater collaboration across the globe in terms of research projects, research planning, including with humanitarian actors on the ground, research has got to be both academic and impactful for refugees and humanitarian actors. And that would then lead to a much greater participation by everybody in designing research projects that will be more useful and more effective.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Really terrific to have you with us. Yeah, appreciate your contribution. Alfred, over to you. Any closing thoughts?
Yes, thank you very much for organizing this and for inviting us. I'm particularly happy to have Abolon on this panel with a PhD student who is doing such a great work, from a refugee camp. And that's exactly what we, in our Share the Platform, we are really promoting, that we hear and we engage, involve refugees in the reflection of everything that's concerned them, that's related to their faith. And I'm really happy for that. I guess, as we said, this ethical code is pretty recent, and it's interesting that Idle was with us. And I guess this is a great reflection for IASFM, that we can probably continue, even the reflection on how do we make this available to researchers. We have it now. How do we promote it? How do we make sure that it's visible to everyone, to researcher, to practitioner, whether when they're starting their research project and when they're going on the field, and how they can, every time have these ethical codes handy, and keep them in the process of research and working with refugees. That's probably what we should be looking at. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Alfred. Thanks for giving us your time today. Ruxandra, you have the floor.
Thank you. I would just like to have a closing remark that re-emphasizes the importance of academia's connection to humanitarian practitioners. I think there's not enough of that, and these kind of events and these kind of platforms provide for such experiences, also involving others which are relevant. So that's quite an invaluable method. So I can't thank you enough for organizing and everyone's active participation. It's very much appreciated, and thank you very much for all of the colleagues which have had the great contributions. A very interesting debate. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ruxandra, and thanks so much for being a part of it. It really has been a rewarding experience working with you and with everybody on this event. And Abolon, over to you for final remarks.
Thank you so much. It has been a great opportunity for me to be part of this great discussion. And this is actually a rare opportunity for refugees to be invited and speaks in such great and big forums where refugee voice is concerned. There are a lot of things that I've learned today in the discussion, and one of which is actually very important is the work that each and everyone right now are doing for refugees to be part of what is happening around, to be part of decision making, to be part of what is happening for their own goods. So this is one thing that I actually love it. And if it goes in the way it is right now, I think the way refugees being perceived and the way refugees think themselves will change in the future. And personally, I'm very happy that to hear from each and every one of you, and also to be part of this discussion, because it will actually give me more understanding, and it will actually give me time now again to think more and also be part of the solution, because the solution only is not lies with the organizations which is now working for this. the solution, the first solution lies with the refugees themselves, and other people now comes in to help them. So this is being my final comment, and thank you very much, and I wish each and everyone the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Abulon, and same to you. And thanks so much for being part of the panel today. It's really been wonderful to have you with us. So that's it. Thanks to everyone for their active participation. It's been really wonderful to see so much activity in the chat, so many questions coming in. Clearly an issue that draws a lot of interest. So we very much appreciate all of you joining today. There will be a recording of the event, both in video and audio only podcast format, that will be available on the event page in the coming days. So with that, I'd like to once again thank everyone, both panelists and participants, for a very interesting discussion, and now sign off from Geneva. Thank you very much. See you next time. Bye-bye.